Hello, this is Arun Burathoki reporting for the NB Media Co-op online at nbmediacoop.org. Last October, the Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation, a provincial crown corporation, released what it called a progress report on overcoming poverty. The release of the report marked the International Day for the Eradication of Poverty. Highlights in the report included a 51% reduction in the number of people living with a low income between 2015 and 2020. But Haley Flaro, the executive director of Ability New Brunswick, says the report is misleading and poverty is getting worse. She says the report overlooks the effects of the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, also called CERB. CERB was a federal relief program that initially provided $500 per week to people affected by the COVID-19 lockdown crisis. The plan lasted from March 15, 2020 until October 3rd, 2020. But CERV is not mentioned in the 48-page report. Here's what Haley Flaro has to say.
Or we're a provincial nonprofit organization and we work with those with a mobility disability. So any condition that impacts the ability to move, even short distances. So maybe it's multiple sclerosis, spina bifida, cerebral palsy, spinal cord injury, amputations. There's many, many conditions that might impact mobility.
Why are you disappointed with the Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation's framing of a recent report on poverty in New Brunswick?
The Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation is supposed to be a leader in advising government, public, community, on the state of poverty in New Brunswick, among other objectives. And their report was their status report was very misleading with the statistics. It seemed to imply that there has been significant strides in reducing poverty in New Brunswick, which is not accurate. The data they cited in the report was comparing 2015 with the year that over 30% of Brunswickers received the CERB the CERB benefit, and so many people in New Brunswick were on the CERB, a very high number, and all that demonstrated was that a living wage works in New Brunswick. Since the CERB has gone away, so has poverty dipped again, because people no longer have access to that living wage that was available during the pandemic. So we're seeing right now higher levels of poverty than our organization has ever seen. People with a disability and single mothers are the two most impoverished population in this province. There are more people on social assistance with a disability than we have ever seen, and deep poverty of people living way below the market basket low income measure is the highest we've ever seen. So we were really disappointed because it sends a false picture of the reality of poverty in our province.
Mhm. So the provincial government, they insist that the poverty is decreasing and the poverty figures are quite low. And like you said, the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit and the report was based on that data. Like, could you tell us more about the CERB and why it's not the appropriate data to base the poverty figures?
Yeah, the poverty figures they were using were comparing the year of the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit and the year that a very high number of New Brunswickers received that. So it didn't give an accurate picture of what's happening in New Brunswick right now in terms of the number of people on social assistance, for example, or the number of people living on less than $12,000 a year who are in deep poverty in New Brunswick. So it was a really inappropriate way to paint a picture of poverty in New Brunswick because it compared to a year where the federal government essentially tested a living wage through the CERB, and we saw really positive incomes in moving people out of poverty. But that CERB disappeared, it didn't stay. And so our poverty levels have again dipped in New Brunswick. And we would have hoped that the Poverty Corporation talked about the current caseload of people with a disability, the current caseload of people on social assistance, talked about the level of deep poverty in New Brunswick, there to advise advise government and community on the state of poverty, and their release was very misleading.
Mhm. So you said that the impact of the Canadian emergency response benefit has been overlooked in the report. Could you explain about that?
They should have done a better job at explaining that this data was not reliable because it was based on the year of the CERB, and a year that the CERB, which really was a living wage, lifted a lot of New Brunswickers out of poverty for a period. A very high number of New Brunswickers were on the CERB. And so, yes, there was a reduction in poverty between 2015 and the year of the CERB, but that's not what we've seen in the last few years, in the last couple of years.
So I'm sensing that you were saying poverty level has not decreased in the province. Like, could you tell us more, like, how is the situation right now in the province?
We are so concerned. In my 25 years working in I've never seen this level of hardship among vulnerable populations such as people with a disability. The inflation rates are skyrocketing. Food security issues are a daily occurrence. People not being able to afford all their bills, and food is a luxury. With threats of MB power rates increasing, people are wondering how they're going to be able to heat their homes. And when you live with a mobility disability, you need to have a warm place to stay. The rent increases. People are having difficulty affording rent increases now that there's no longer a cap. And that people are more at risk of homelessness. I see more people with a mobility disability on the streets or in shelters when they can get into shelters, because most aren't accessible, than I've ever seen. So we have a perfect storm of crisis in New Brunswick, in addition to the healthcare crisis, which is impacting people's ability to work and continue their jobs and take care of their health. So we have a perfect storm right now, and we're going to see poverty rates continue to rise.
Is there any support from the provincial or federal government for people with disabilities?
We are working right now with the federal government, and it's gone through the House of Commons to look at a Canada Disability Benefit. Provided a lot of advice around the eligibility for that. We are very hopeful that that benefit will help give a living wage to New Brunswick's most impoverished population, which is single mothers, but people with a disability, including single mothers with a disability. So we're really hopeful about that. We are worried that the province will claw back those benefits or make New Brunswickers ineligible for things like health cards that will fund adapted equipment like wheelchairs and rollators and lifts. So we're going to have a lot of advocacy work to do to make sure that the Canada Disability Benefit, in fact, is a living wage and doesn't put people in New Brunswick at a disability at a more disadvantage.
How much amount are we talking about in this new benefit?
They haven't released the exact amount, but there has been lots of work done to ensure that it would be a living wage amount similar to the CERB. So I'm hoping that that recommendation continues. We know that the CERB was a great example of demonstrating that a living wage works for people, people with a disability, especially.
That spans like over the 4 weeks. Like, how does it work? Like, is it monthly or bi?
It Ideally, the Canada Disability Benefit would be a monthly wage for people so they can plan their expenses and ensure they're meeting their housing needs, their food security needs, power, utilities, all of those things.
Mhm. Like you said, the SERB is not valid anymore. What does it mean for the poverty figures in the province? Um, like you said, you are also working with this new benefit. What does it mean for the poverty figures?
So, for example, in December 2022, in New Brunswick, there was close to 6,000 people with a disability, a designated disability, on social assistance in New Brunswick, and there was a total of over 21,000 people on social assistance in New Brunswick. So that's one of our indicators. That's a high number of people with a disability. That included, an increase over the previous year of close to 3,000 people on social assistance. So, we are seeing the number of people with the number of people requiring social assistance in New Brunswick increasing.
How can we tackle poverty in the province?
Well, there there's a lot of elements to, attacking poverty reduction that needs to happen at the government level, the community level, so at the personal level. We do have this Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation, but I just saw an announcement this week that they're now taking all of their community inclusion networks and they're going to the regional development commissions, and I'm really disappointed to hear that. That was the community inclusion networks that were organizations under the Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation that were boots on the ground working with people with lived experience. So now we have a poverty corporation that's going to be really disconnected from people living in poverty. So I think it's time to review the Poverty Corporation, its objectives, and work with community organizations to see what the priority needs to be to address root issues of poverty in New Brunswick. There's a whole bunch of root issues. There's childhood traumas. There's lack of access to mental health services and addiction services. There's disability and lack of access to health care and transportation and employment. There's so many root issues that need to be addressed, and it's not just one department. It's not just one community. So we need a new strategy and a new plan, and we also need to prioritize certain populations like single parents and people with a disability in our province to start moving the needle. Yes, we might have seen the general population have some improvements between 2015 and the year of the CERB on poverty, but where is the data on people with disability? Because my data is telling me that it's getting deep. The poverty among that population is getting deeper and deeper in our province.
In your last press release, you did state that you'd write to the Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation to revamp the report. Have you heard from them?
We did. We received a response that really didn't address our concerns with their data quality. They said they were just reporting verbatim. We know what the federal data, and again, we've articulated our disappointment. That's not good stewardship of data. They need to be presenting the current, situation and the current state of poverty in our province. And I just, in three simple quick clicks, was able to see the data and trends on social assistance rates in the province and how they've increased year over year. They should be reporting data like that. I continue to be really disappointed, and I think there's a data integrity problem, at the corporation, and they need to again be promoting and painting a better picture of the reality of poverty in New Brunswick.
Mhm. So my last question would be, what's the way forward, to tackle poverty, not just for people with disabilities, but for everyone within the province?
We need to develop a better public and government reporting scorecard on poverty in our province that really looks at what the root issues are. We need a better strategy that's going to focus on what we see as the root issues that people with a disability are experiencing, such as the onset of disability, lack of access to certain healthcare and rehabilitation, childhood traumas, difficulties with addictions and mental health. We need to really, and the cost of equipment for and accessible transportation and accessible housing. So we need a more focused, rigorous strategy on poverty in our province.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Erin.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll talk to you again soon.
That was Haley Flaro, Executive Director of Ability New Brunswick. A spokesperson for the Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation provided a statement to the NB Media Co-op for this story. He said, under provincial law, the Crown Corporation must publish a report every 2 years about the government's economic and social inclusion plan and its 9 priority actions. But he said it was not a report on the state of poverty in New Brunswick. He said, we have complemented the report with statistical data from Statistics Canada 2020 Canadian Income Survey. You can read the full statement from the provincial government on our website, nbmediacoop.org, along with all our latest articles. For the NB Media Co-op, I'm Arun Murathogi.